hello. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to episode 41 of KNITLIB, the podcast. My name is Susan, and I am a knitter and artist and educator and library person living and working in Calgary, Alberta. And, excuse me, this is my little corner of YouTube that I like to share my knitting, my crafty pursuits, books, and library life, and all that stuff. If you're a first-time viewer, first time checking out my channel, welcome. It's so great to have you here. If you're a returning viewer, thanks for coming back. It's really great to see you, and I'm really happy to take a little bit of time today to chat at your face about some of the cool things that I've been up to. And yes, so yeah, it's been a little while since my last update. I think it was back in January, and since then, since episode 40, shush, apologies if you can hear the cat in the background every so often. He's a little bored right now, so he's getting into all sorts of shenanigans. Yeah, so lots of things have happened since my last update. One of them being the last update that I gave you, it was at the beginning of January, and I had just actually begun a recovery from a concussion. I hit my head while I was at work. I work as my official job title is a library experience facilitator. I like to consider myself a library wizard, working primarily with children and families at the public library. And I was a little too enthusiastic with my play, and I totally hit my head off of a play structure. Which, yeah, it wasn't my finest moment, and yeah, it took a little while to recover from that. It took probably about a full month to recover, and as a result, in between that time, my work schedule was cut like in half, and I couldn't spend a lot of time in front of the computer. I couldn't really focus on doing a lot of things because just my brain was all foggy. And then on top of that, I ended up getting sick. I got a really brutal cold, which was a bit intense, and that took a little while to get over, and then school and work and everything just kind of piled up, and then I got another cold, and yeah, that's my whole sordid tale of what's been happening since I last updated you, or since I was last here. I do have another cold. I'm in the process of getting over it. So apologies if I sound a little nasal and all that stuff. And again, apologies for the sounds that my cat is making. But yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to be here to share some of my current works in progress with you. And yes, did I bring everything over? I think I brought everything over. Yeah, Ryan, it is a Friday, and my husband Ryan just went to go get his hair cut, so that means I have about an hour at home today by myself on my day off to record this. So I'm going to see how quickly I can do everything. Nothing like being kept on a schedule to keep my rambling to a minimum. What are you doing? What are you doing? Whatever. So I'm going to share some half-finished objects with you. I do have a finished object that I want to share with you, but I think I will just I think I posted it already on Instagram. I'm KNITLIB on Instagram if you don't follow me there. And yeah, I finished what I'm now calling my connaught socks. So connaught, which is spelled Connaught, named after the neighborhood that I live in Calgary. And my connaught socks are a double-stranded sort of DK weight sock knit with 2 strands of fingering weight yarn held together. And I finished my second pair of those, but they're really dirty because I've worn them a lot this week. And so I don't really want to show them to you because I haven't washed them. But I do have a half-finished object of the 3rd iteration of those socks that I'm working on that I can show you the first one of it. And here we go. This is Connaught, the reverse stockinette weekender version inspired. Has a very long leg. I've knit it to fit my very narrow European size 41 foot. So that's like a ladies, American, Canadian, whatever, ladies 10 size foot. I got skis for feet. So this is to knit that to fit my foot. It is worked with 2 strands of fingering weight yarn held together. One of them is a Peyton's Croy yarn, which I have the other one in progress here. So I'm just going to show you the ball right there. Peyton's Croy there, and it's a Croy Socks FX, and the colorway I think is Cameo Colors, I think is what the colorway is. And it's like a soft gradient stripe. And then I'm holding it together with, and again, I have the other half of this ball somewhere else. This is an online color that is self-striping. And you can kind of see there are all of these sort of pinks and light greens and blacks and speckles and all this stuff. This has more solid self-striping action happening. So I'm holding those 2 together, which has created basically a worsted weight sock because the Peyton's Croy is more like a sport weight. It's a very heavy fingering weight yarn, so the gauge of the sock is a little bigger than the previous socks that I've made, but it's a top-down construction. I basically cast on 44 stitches, about that, give or take, maybe less, I don't know, can't remember. I have everything written down, and I'm planning on writing a pattern and making it available to everybody, but I'm just kind of working through my design process right now. So I did a 2x2 rib, which you can see here, and then I switched to reverse stockinette while keeping a 2 knit stitch with a ridge down the side of the sock, which kind of follows the whole length of the sock down. So I did a really traditional heel flap right here and a gusset, and on the foot part, the bottom of the foot is done in stockinette, and the top of the foot just continues in the reverse stockinette, and then the toe is knit entirely, if you can kind of see here, the toe is knit in stockinette. So yeah, I really like how this turned out. It's the self-striping, it's really fun because it's 2 self-striping yarns essentially held together, and it's created this really lovely marled effect that is like self-striping but not self-striping but kind of self-striping, depending on which part of either ball I'm into. I think that kind of determines the dominance, the color dominance. Jessup, my cat. Really pleased with how this turned out, and it didn't take very long to knit at all, and I have been kind of waffling on casting on the second sock, just because there are a couple of issues with this that I fixed as I was knitting. So I'm trying to, in the second one, I'm following the pattern that I have written, and I'm trying to do things correctly. So this is what I have so far on the second sock, which you can see here. I have a progress keeper just right there. I need a nail file. I have like a jagged edge. Okay, so 2x2 rib again, and then I'm knitting on magic loop. These are a size 3mm or a US 2.5 size needle, and this is a 32-inch circular needle. And I really love knitting this on magic loop method because what ends up happening, knitting, like purling every stitch in magic loop is a bit of a pain in the butt. And it's the same for double point needles too, because it's so easy to create accidental yarn overs when you're switching needles. So to counteract that, what I've done is I've placed these faux seam stitches, which is that knit stitch ridge right there. Placing one stitch at the beginning of one needle and one stitch at the end. So you can see I've essentially just split it in half. So I'm always beginning on a knit stitch and ending on a knit stitch, no matter which needle I'm on. And that seems to make things go by faster. And I'm really loving how this is turning out. I'm getting there. I'm almost, yeah, if you can see here, I am almost to the point where I can start doing the heel flap. And I'll do that and then start doing the foot, and then I'll have a pair of socks and it'll look really great. I'm really thrilled with how these turned out, and I'm excited to try the exact same pattern with everything using different yarns, maybe two more true fingering weight yarns, just because I know the Peyton's Croix is a little thicker, so it's not giving me true gauge necessarily. I love knitting these not double knit, but like double strand socks because it goes so much faster. They go so fast. And they're so squishy without being like too bulky. And as someone who wears Blundstones, Blundstone boots like all winter long, my Blundstones are older. They're like 5 years old, 6 years old, maybe even older. Might even be older than that. And they've stretched out considerably. They're still in really good condition, aside from the fact that the leather is stretched right out. As a result, I have to put in a pretty thick insole in there in order for my feet to stay in, because my feet are so narrow. And I can't wear nylons in there. I have to wear wool socks in order to take up that, in order for the boots to be really comfortable. And these double strand, I keep saying double knit, they're not double knit. These double strand socks in there, they feel amazing. They feel so great. So I'm thrilled about these, and I know that there have been a couple of viewers that have been inspired by making their own version of double strand socks. So these connaught socks, they're good. I'm going to write up the pattern. I'm probably going to do write up a basic sort of recipe that I've been using, and maybe include a couple of different size options, and then bring in a couple of different variations on a theme. So I'm thinking the pattern will probably be this reverse stockinette kind of fun thing, but also just a plain ribbed sock as well. And then I might do another version of just a stockinette. So there'll be three different versions, and within the pattern, I'm thinking that I'll use basically the same stitch counts. So, you know, it kind of gives a bit of variety. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. And also a heel flap and a gusset is the best. I've been watching a lot of knitting podcasts lately, and I know some folks have been going back onto the heel flap and gusset bandwagon, which is, I fully approve, because those are the only kinds of socks that actually fit my feet comfortably, are heel flap and gusset. And that's the problem with having narrow heels and a really high arch. So yeah. Next on the knitting docket is another project that I started, I didn't have this on the last episode. I started it a couple of weeks ago, and it was because Calgary and pretty much most of North America has been trapped in a polar vortex. So I decided to make woolen trousers for the polar vortex because, yeah, living in Canada, in the area of Canada that I'm in, it gets cold here in the winter. Very cold. It's been very, very cold for like 3 weeks now. And I walk everywhere, and I know how to dress for the weather. Don't get me wrong, I know how to dress for the weather, but I, I, I don't have enough woolly things to put on my legs. I wear, for the most part, all dresses and skirts and leggings, and so I tend to layer up and everything, and I have leg warmers that I can pull up over my knees, but I needed to be warmer. Needed to be way warmer. So I was looking through my Ravelry library of all the patterns I've purchased over the years, and I've purchased a lot of Stephen West patterns. And thing with Stephen West patterns, if you're a longtime fan of his and have purchased a lot of his patterns and made a lot of his patterns, is that he tends to repeat things again and again, but just like in slightly different iterations. So the pattern that I'm using, I think it might have been his first bottom, like pants pattern that he's made. Since then, he's come out with some other ones that are like leggings and stuff like that. So I had a copy of Cushy Tushy, which is a top-down woolen pant pattern with wide legs that kind of come in at the cuff, and it's like a folded hem cuff. And then like high-waisted. I've tried to knit the leggings. He had like a Marled Mania leggings pattern that came out last year, or the year before. I think it was last year. And I tried knitting that, and the problem with knitting those, and if longtime viewers might remember me making these, I ended up ripping it all out, is that the pattern, he's designed it for basically his body, and Stephen West is a tall, male body. So he doesn't necessarily have hips. Not to say men don't have hips, it's just he doesn't really have them. And when I made it, I have hips. My waist is fairly small compared to my hips. I have a big butt, and I have curves where, and my torso is short. Like my hips are quite high, or my waist is very high. So I prefer things to be high-waisted. So when I was knitting these Marled Mania leggings, they just weren't fitting. They were sitting way too low, and I'm like, I love the way that they were turning out, but I'm like, they're not going to fit me. So I made a conscious effort when I would cast on for these Cushy Tushy pants, is that I knew the construction, what was going to happen. There was going to be short rows that go down across the hips, down towards like over your butt, to raise the back of it up. And I increased. That's probably so far the only change that I've done with the pattern, is significant change anyways. I added short rows in there. So anyway, this is the result. I finished one leg. Here it is so far. Here we go. Yay. Here they are. They're quite heavy. You can kind of see the hem. Here's the back, where you can see a bit of the short row action happening across here. I think it called for like, I don't know, 9 short rows or something, and I did 12 just to lift this up higher. I did the leg shorter than what is suggested in the pattern, just because I didn't want them to be full length. I wanted them to hit sort of me mid-calf, so that I could layer my leg warmers underneath it and look kind of cute. It does have a folded hem which I've kind of haphazardly sewn in right there. It's a little squished, but that's okay. Yeah, they're quite wide leg, like they're wide leg trousers, but they're really comfy. And I just have the other leg to do, and then I'll be able to wear these. Once I block them, then I think I'll decide if I'm gonna put a drawstring in here. I might do a little drawstring in there because while they do fit pretty well across my hips, I know that they'll stretch over time and they'll fall down. So I want to have a little bit of a tie in there. The yarn that I used for this is, let me hold it up. It's stash yarn, and it's basically 2 worsted weight yarns held together. And I'm knitting, this whole thing is knit on a 6.5 millimeter needle. Which is like a US 10.5, I think. I think that's the needle size. Yeah. And so it's really fast. It's a really fast knit. I'm using 1 skein of Briggs & Little Regal. Briggs & Little is a yarn that's out of New Brunswick, Canada. And Briggs & Little is probably the most popular yarn that you'll find in Atlantic Canada. When I was growing up, you could find Briggs & Little like at the gas station when I was growing up in Newfoundland. Find it in the hardware store, like you find it everywhere. It's a lovely, like worsted spun, I always call it itchy scratchy farm wool. It's like my favorite kind of wool. And this one is, we have Regal 2-ply. It's 272 yards or 248 meters per 100 grams. That's about how much is there. This is about 4 ounces, which is 113 grams. It's 100% pure wool. And I purchased it for, look at this price. Look at this price. I purchased it for $6.47. $6.47. Yeah, I love this yarn. Regal is a little bit different than Heritage. The Briggs & Little Heritage yarn is a little thicker. It's like an Aran weight. And Regal, I think, has much more, it's a true worsted, and it has a lot more yardage on it, which is awesome. But I'm holding it together with this skein of Peace Fleece right here, which is another lovely, gorgeous color. You can kind of see the flecks of blue and purple in here. Peace Fleece, this is, I had, the colorway is Samantha Katya Pink. And I love this yarn. I love Peace Fleece so much. My local yarn shop used to carry it, and they no longer carry it. But I love Peace Fleece because it is a mix of, what do we have in here? It's 75% merino wool and 25% mohair. It's so warm and like it's soft. It's soft. It wears really nicely. I have another sweater that's made out of this stuff, but in a different color. And I absolutely love it. I'm holding it together to create this sort of chunky weight marled. That's like, it's marled, but like it's a solid marl. So these are pretty neutral considering. Yeah, I'm really thrilled. Really thrilled. They're going to be so warm. And I mean, sure enough, it's almost March. And the polar vortex is leaving, so it's not going to be, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not going to be like -20 in March. But again, you never know. This is Calgary. You never know. So I have to pick up the stitches to work on the rest of that. This is living inside of an old homemade basket I made a long time ago. It is basically old pillowcases that have been quilted through an old blanket, and then I hand stitched it closed and like put a bottom on it to create this sort of like big basket. And I love it for keeping all of my larger projects in. I find it works quite well. Yeah, so that's working, that's coming along. And yeah, I'm excited to finish those. The other thing that I had been working on last podcast, but I have actually frogged, is my doocot sweater. And that was after a lot of contemplation on my part. The doocot sweater is a pattern by Kate Davies. I had cast it on and was knitting along. I had the body, like, I was maybe 2 inches away from doing the ribbing, bottom ribbing. And in this yarn, it's another, I have a theme today. I'm like, everything is kind of like these pink colors. This lovely sort of jewel toned magenta purple type of color. This is, the yarn is Mineville Wool Project. They're out of Nova Scotia. This is their Superwash DK. I really love this yarn. I find it wears really easily, really nicely. And I was really looking forward to having this super cute cropped boxy sweater because it was shaped very similarly to my Weekender, not my, well, yeah, Weekender, but my Nurtured sweater by Andrea Mowry. But yeah, if you're involved in the Ravelry communities, which I'm not necessarily involved, I don't go to the forums or anything like that, but if you're on Instagram and you've been a part of all of the discussions that are happening around racism, white privilege, and white fragility in the knitting community, in the making community, and ethical fashion community, you know, if you're on Instagram, if you haven't seen these conversations happening, then you're willfully ignoring it. So that's just my, because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's completely infiltrated the knitting world as I know it, and it's amazing, and that these discussions are happening. And it's actually one of the things that I've been pulling from it, because I've been actively listening to a lot of different voices that are speaking a lot more eloquently than I can. But I've been listening to these stories and of Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been, different knitters and everything have been talking about their stories of exclusion and of racism that they've experienced in the community. And it made me think a lot more about the type of knitting that I do and who I'm supporting, and looking a little bit more closely at my own knitting practice and my life in general, and whether or not that I am representing myself in the way that I want to be represented, and being a good ally to my friends and the other knitters in my life that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or part of the LGBTQ community. How am I being a good ally to them and supporting them? And that's when I started thinking a lot about how much of ourselves we put into our knitting, whether we're designing or we're knitting garments or whatever. And you can't separate knitting from the people that are making. That it's impossible. This is a really human activity. And to say, to dismiss stories, human stories, that they're real people making things, and these are real stories, to dismiss them as like, you know, oh, let's just not get political. Let's just, you know, stick to the knitting and all this stuff. I think that that's complete BS. And to me, my knitting is like my feminism, which is intersectional and inclusive, and recognizes that as a white, cisgender, middle-class woman, I hold certain privileges. And I recognize that in order to be more inclusive with my feminism, in order to be more inclusive with my knitting, I have to recognize that in myself and see how that impacts other folks, and making sure that I am doing my best to lift people up and not stand on the backs of other people. So yes, this is all to say, when everything started coming out about Kate Davies, and if you're not aware, I'm going to include some stuff in my show notes, which you can find on my website, knitlib.ca, to some of the discussions that have been happening about this specifically. But basically, the kind of like the summary of it is that, Kate Davies was questioned about her stance on this dialogue, and as someone with a brand, she's essentially a brand. She's a person, yeah, but she's a brand with a huge online presence, a huge online social media platform, and she people were trying to hold her accountable, basically going like, where do you stand on this? Because to ignore, when you have that large of a platform, and to ignore the discussions that are happening, that's problematic. That's super, super problematic, because you can't ignore it. You just can't. We're at a position now, at a point in all of this dialogue, that change is happening. It's slow, it's painful, but it's happening. But to ignore it or to dismiss it is super, that's just not fair. That's not fair to anybody. So as people were holding her accountable, this is when I started to I used to have a lot of admiration for Kate Davies and her patterns. I really loved her patterns. I still do, but oh, it's getting dark in here. Ugh. There we go. I still love her patterns, but it was getting really hard for me to separate the person from the pattern. And I did not agree with the statements that she was putting up on her Instagram that basically equated to, she's not going to do the work, or the like anti-racism work on her social media platform, because she feels that that's not a good platform for it, and that she's doing anti-racism work offline in the real world, that social media is not the real world and can't have an impact, and yada yada. And I'm just like, okay, hold on a second here. That's I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that, especially when you're in a position of power like that. You have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to talk about these things, and if people are trying to hold you accountable, saying, okay, you say you're doing anti-racist work, inclusive work in the real world. What are some examples of that? That's a fair question, I think. And I think the responses that ended up coming up were, like, she ended up shutting a lot of people down, and either blocking comments, deleting comments, and all that stuff, and dismissing people's voices. And that just did not sit well with me. And so I'm sitting there knitting my doocot. Sitting there, I'm like trying to reconcile this notion that knitting, that is just a sweater. It's just knitting. I'm getting back to the knitting. It's just knitting. I couldn't do it. Like, I felt I couldn't reconcile that between what I was reading from her and the position that I feel I stand very firmly on, and then knitting the sweater, because we put so much time and energy and so much of ourselves into what we're making, that I really began to wonder, what does this say about me, that I'm putting all of my creative time, my energy, myself into this project that is designed by somebody that I have a bit of an issue with now. A bit of an issue. I have a big issue. What does it say about me? Yeah, knitting has power. Your voice has power. And I just decided, you know what? F this. We're ripping the whole thing out. We're frogging it. So that's what I did. I sat and I frogged the whole thing by hand. I sat and lovingly unwound that whole sweater. And now I have multiple balls of this yarn left over that I will figure out another project for. Yeah. So that was a little bit sad to do, a little bit, because I'm just like, oh, you have that moment when you unravel something. It's like, oh man, I put so much work into that. But it really did feel like it felt like the right thing for me to do. I'm not going to tell you to unravel anything. It's entirely up to you. But I think if there's one thing there are so many important things and lessons that I've learned personally from all of the stories that have been coming out on YouTube and on social media, on Instagram, and the things that are, I'm not being very eloquent right now, but the things that have stuck out to me the most is this feeling of, wow, we are humanizing our craft. And realizing that there are people in this sphere, this knitting community, this online knitting community that we've created. These are filled with real people. And that is like really exciting to me, because I think we get caught on the surface. We're stuck on the surface all the time, and it becomes a very individualistic, really dangerous situation where if you're only focusing on the yarn and not on the people too, then you're going to end up in this weird insular pocket where it's just like on Facebook, where you surround yourself with only the voices that you agree with. Like, you need to expose yourself to different perspectives and expose yourself to the fact that this craft, this community that we're part of, is filled with people with real stories, with real feelings, with real issues, with real things. And that's like probably the biggest thing that has come out of all of this for me, is remembering that I'm connected to other people, and that my actions and the things that I say have an impact, whether they are on Instagram, YouTube, or whether I am in person working at the library. My actions have an impact. Your actions have an impact. We don't operate in a vacuum. We're connected. We're all connected. Yes. And that's what I have to say about that. So the benefit, if there can be a benefit, of frogging a whole project, it's that suddenly I have one less project on the needles, which means I can cast on something new. So, excuse me, that's what I've done. I have cast on using I'm going to show you the yarn first. This is sock yarn. This is Lang Yarn's Javel color. Superwash wool, self-striping yarn. It's in sort of a colorway that is shades you can't really, I don't know, things are kind of blowing out because of the window there. But they're like purples and blues and grays and all this stuff. It's a really really dark yarn. And I got this at my Christmas party for the knitting shop that I teach at. We did like this big mystery gift exchange. It was really fun. And this was one of the yarns in the gift exchange that I got. So I'm using this. I'm knitting a pattern called the Ripple Bralette by Jessie May, what is her last name? Martinson. Jessie May Martinson, who's Jessie May on Instagram. And all the links and stuff will be on my show notes. So purchased a couple of her patterns because she was having a birthday sale, I think, just recently, and I grabbed a couple. And one of them being the Ripple Bralette, which is essentially like a bralette. It's a bra that is knit with fingering weight yarn, and it's ribbed, so it should have a very close fit. I'm excited to do it because I stopped wearing underwire bras probably like 5 years ago, and I only wear bralettes or sports bras and stuff now. And because I find them the most comfortable, and I'm not concerned about keeping like my mid-range titties like up to my nose. I don't really care. I really don't. And especially because my weight has been fluctuating, and so I've gotten smaller around my bust line. So at least with a bralette, it kind of makes up for the, like, yeah, you know what I mean. For those people that wear bras, I think you understand what I'm getting going on about. But the bralette I thought was super cute, and I thought, oh my gosh, how cute would that be to wear under like a tank top, or like even just lounging around the house. I would wear it under everything, and especially it would be so good for another, like an added layer, because you know, polar vortex. Um, so funny. The pattern is amazing because she's a size inclusive pattern designer. So all of her patterns have a wide range of sizes in them. I'm knitting the second smallest because she suggests that you go 9 to 11 inches in negative ease. So that puts me at like the second smallest size in order to fit around my, like, what is it, the band like thing. Anyway, whatever. So I'm knitting this and I'm like, honest to God, it looks like I'm making a hat. Like, so hopefully, I don't think I'm making this too small. I think it's going to start, I'm not going to do it while it's on the needles because I'm using a 3.25 millimeter needle right now. And it began with a 1x1 twisted rib, which you can't, I apologize for the darkness, but you can kind of see here. And then it goes into a 3x3 rib where it'll come up and then it'll separate to do the straps. I'm going to make it kind of higher, so it's not like a low neckline on the bralette. I want it to be a little bit higher. So the idea being that you might be able to see it when I wear a lower shirt. That's what I kind of want, and I want more coverage. And I think by knitting it really small like this, I think this is going to provide that structure that I need for it to fit around my body. And when I hold it up, and it really looks like a hat. Oh my gosh, this looks so small, but it will stretch. I'm confident that it will stretch, and I think it's going to fit pretty great when it's done. I'm really excited I was mentioning it to somebody about how fun it's going to be when I finish my woolen trousers and then I have my little Ripple bralette, and then I can like do a funny little dance. And I wanted to make a new balaclava because I wanted to get back into art knitting as well. I'm like, oh, and I'll make a balaclava and then I'll look wacky and I'm just going to do dances everywhere and it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, that's a bit of my plan. Yeah. And that's all my knitting for right now. Woohoo! I'm thrilled about this. I'm probably gonna work on it tonight, I think, because we have an art opening that we're going to tonight. It is a Friday, I mentioned. We're going to an art opening at one of the artist run centers that Ryan used to sit on the board of, and that I've done a lot of volunteering for. And I think we might end up going to the pub like we've normally been doing on Fridays, just beforehand, and eat some pizza. I want pizza. Okay, now that brings us to the end, and I want to talk about what do I want to talk about? I don't remember. Yeah, that brings us pretty much to the end. I stayed pretty true to keeping, this is what I get for writing show notes and for being under a tight timeline, because I think Ryan is going to be home very shortly. But yeah, I'm going to talk about some of my favorites right now. That's what we'll end with, I think, some of my favorites. So I'm going to talk about favorite things. So what I've been watching, what I've been listening to, and what I've been reading. So what I've been watching. I recently, because I've been sick and stressed out and all this stuff, I have been binge watching some stuff. There are two things that I've been binge watching. One of them was Russian Doll, which is on Netflix. Russian Doll, so good. I would recommend it to anyone that likes watching weird sort of, it's a little cerebral, I find, that show. It's funny. It ends, I'm not going to give anything away about it in case you want to check it out, but it does end on a, what I think is a positive note, despite the fact that there is a lot of negative things that happen throughout it. But basically, yeah, it's addictive to watch. I thought it was going to be almost like a Groundhog Day kind of show, or like that movie with, what is it, Emily Blunt and Tom Cruise, that one where he just keeps dying over and over again. I thought it was going to be like that. And there were elements for sure, but it's not like that. And yeah, if you're not, I was thinking of mentioning it to a pal of mine who was thinking about watching it, but was on the fence because they were afraid it was going to be really violent. You don't see a lot of the deaths. The characters do die. The two main characters die like every episode. They're dying like all the time, but you don't actually see them die necessarily. So it's not really gruesome in that way, except for there's one part where it is kind of gruesome, but for the most part, it's not. Yeah, I really loved that show. There's only like 8 episodes or 10 episodes or something like that, and they're short. They're like a half an hour long each, so you can definitely like burn through it in a weekend. Yeah, I really loved Russian Doll, and also the main character's hair. Her name, I'm totally blanking on her name right now, but her hair, it's just amazing. And Ryan's home. Hi. You got your hair cut. The other thing that I've been watching is shoot. It's also on Netflix. It's called One Strange Rock, and I think it was originally on, I can't remember which TV station or whatever it was on, but it's hosted by Will Smith, and it has a bunch of astronauts on it, and they talk about Earth and space, and I've watched the first 3 episodes. It's beautifully shot. If you like science, space-related shows, I totally recommend it. And especially if you're in the mood to get really existential about things, that's also a really good show to watch, because it kind of, you know, messes up your brain a little bit. So there have been a couple of times when I've been walking and like walking through downtown and looking at the buildings going, oh wow, we're just a small speck of sand and a giant thing of galactic dust and da 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 da. Really, really, really funny. But it's a really good show. I would recommend that too. And what else? The books I've been reading right now, I just finished one book. I listened to it as an audiobook. It was fantastic. And that is called Spinning Silver, and it's by Naomi Novik? Is that what it's called? Let me see. Yeah, it's by Naomi Novik, and it is kind of like a weird adaptation of Rumpelstiltskin, kind of. It's fantastic, and it was recommended to me by a library friend, and I basically devoured it because I read the first book. It's not a series, but like they have similar covers. The first book of Naomi Novik's that I've read is called Uprooted, and that was kind of and I think it's being made into a movie now too. But it's a great sort of reinterpretation of Beauty and the Beast, and also around this Russian folklore of this sort of old witch that lives in the forest called like Baba Yaga. I think I think that's the myth. It's based off of Baba Yaga the and Beauty and the Beast. And then Spinning Silver is based off of very loosely based off of Rumpelstiltskin. And what's really great about this book, and I would recommend you either read it like in a normal like book format or listen to it. The reader for the audiobook version is fantastic. Though I will say, because there's so many different characters taking voiced in the book, that her voices for some of the characters are so close that sometimes it's difficult to discern like right away which character you're hearing from. So that's my only criticism about the audiobook version. But there are lots of spinning and knitting references in the book, so that's kind of fun. And it's also written from a feminist perspective, and the characters are strong female characters that they're just amazing. And I really recommend, if you like fantasy, if you like historical fantasy, fairy tale type of thing, and are itching to read about winter while you're still in winter, that's a really good book to check out. The book that I'm currently reading is a really big departure from that, and that comes from a recommendation that another one of my library Instagram friends kept posting about this author. One of her favorite authors right now, called what's her name, Alyssa Cole, and she's on Instagram. I'll leave the information in the show notes. She wrote she's like a prolific contemporary historical romance writer. I think she also has done some like dystopian romance and stuff too. And the most current series she's working on right now, I don't know if it's a trilogy or what it is, but it's called the Reluctant Royalty, whatever. I'm reading it on my Kindle. And yeah, this one, the series is called Reluctant Royals. They're quick reads, they're contemporary romance. The first book in the series is called A Princess in Theory, and oh my gosh, this book is such a joy to read. If you want something that the language is incredibly accessible, it's fast, it's quick to read. The characters, the female characters are really strong. And it's just kind of like a ridiculous story where we have the main character, her name is Naledi, or Naledi, I think it's Naledi, Letty for short. She is a grad student studying epidemiology. I can't say that. Epidemiology. There you go. Study of infectious diseases. And she's like, this Black woman in STEM, and then talking about all of the discrimination and everything she experiences, like from microaggressions to full-on racism and sexism in the industry that she works. And she keeps getting these emails from what essentially looks like spam or phishing emails, where it's like, I'm a Nigerian prince, can you send me money type of thing. It's sort of that, but it's coming from another person whose name is, what is their name? Lakotsi is that character's name, and she is the assistant to the prince of this, to a prince from a country called Tholosi. And I think, am I getting all the words right? I think I'm getting, because his name is Thabizo, and I can't remember, yeah, Thesolo. Thesolo is the name of the country. And anyway, long story short, with all of this stuff, is she's emailing the main character, Naledi, saying, "You're betrothed to marry this prince, but we need to confirm your identity. Can you please send us like all of this information and like your, you know, essentially your social insurance number and like your driver's license and all this stuff?" And she's like, "No, no." And they keep emailing her and emailing her and emailing her. She keeps ignoring it. And then finally she just can't take it anymore. And she just like sends a one-line thing back that's just like F off. And suddenly, like, the Bezo ends up in New York where she lives and is going through this whole ruse of trying to get to know her. So he's pretending to be somebody else and not like this, you know, prince from this. It's really ridiculous and incredibly enjoyable. And if you enjoy contemporary romance, I would strongly encourage you to look up Alyssa Cole if you haven't already. I am hooked. I am halfway through this first book. I already purchased the second and the novella, and I have the third. I've pre-ordered the third book. I'm really excited about them. They're so much fun to read. I think you can get them as audio books too, but to be honest, like you can power through the print version like really quick. So if you're looking for something just to kind of lift you up a little bit and make you giggle and just a break from reality, yeah, strongly recommend the Reluctant Royals series by Alyssa Cole. It's great. Yeah, I think that's the end. Ryan just came home and we're gonna go off and do something now, I guess. And I'm gonna finish my cider and make some lunch of some kind. And yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. If you like this episode, please feel free to give a thumbs up, subscribe to be updated and all this stuff. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm KNITLIB on Instagram, and check out for show notes on my blog, knitlib.ca. Yeah, I hope you have an enjoyable next whenever until the next time I talk with you again. And yeah, keep being magic, keep knitting. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.